The drone footage was clear as day, brown sludge pouring into the lake right past the no trespassing sign I personally installed. Karen, the HOA president, was standing beside a backhoe like she was unveiling a statue. Cut to me on the other side of the lake, phone in one hand, binoculars in the other, already dialing my lawyer. "Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how we got here, to the part where the HOA is guzzling sewage through their own water supply and trying to sue me for it. It started with the smell. Not the usual earthy, fishy lake scent I'd grown used to after living on the water for 10 years. No, this was sharper, sour almost, like someone left diapers out in the sun and then tried to cover it with air freshener. I first noticed it on a Tuesday morning while sipping my usual coffee on the deck, watching the ducks cut lazy wakes across the lake. The water was darker than usual, too, greasy. I remember because it reminded me of motor oil floating in a puddle after a rainstorm. I figured maybe someone upstream dumped something by accident, maybe the construction site a mile north. But by Thursday, the ducks were gone, and the algae that'd normally show up in late July had exploded overnight. Whole mats of it, greenish-gray and stringy, spread out like mossy pancakes across the surface. I wasn't a scientist, but I knew something was off. And I'm not the kind of guy who waits around for someone else to do the hard asking. So I grabbed my kayak, a cooler full of ice, and a few mason jars. Spent most of that Saturday paddling around like some backwoods EPA agent, scooping water samples and storing them next to my Coors Light. The smell got worse, closer to the southeast cove, behind the maintenance shed near the HOA's storm drainage outflow. That's when I found it. A plastic tube, the size of a fire hose, half buried in cattails and trickling brown liquid straight into the lake. No signage, no filtration, just a crud-colored hose spewing God knows what into the water I used to swim in every summer. I took photos, then video. Then I called the county. The woman at Environmental Services said she'd open a case, but the way her voice fell flat told me she didn't plan on losing sleep over it. I wasn't surprised. Around here, the HOA carries more weight than the mayor, and Karen, our board president, treats it like her personal kingdom. You either kiss the ring or risk exile. I decided to skip both and bring the evidence directly to the source. Monday afternoon, I walked into the HOA office with a manila folder under one arm and 3 water jars in the other. Karen was perched behind her desk like a queen in exile, pressed linen blouse, pearl earrings, and a tight-lipped smile that said she'd already decided she didn't like me today. "Mr. Franklin," she said, folding her hands like she was about to offer me a financial planning seminar. "I assume you're here about the algae." I opened the folder and slid a glossy photo across her desk, a close-up of the hose. "That's not algae, Karen. That's untreated sewage, coming from behind your maintenance shed." Her smile didn't twitch. "Do you have proof that it's sewage?" I set one of the mason jars down. "How about you sniff that and tell me what you think?" She didn't. Instead, she slid the photo back toward me like a blackjack dealer folding a busted hand. "Mr. Franklin, your property is adjacent to the lake. How do we know the contamination isn't coming from your septic system?" I blinked. "Because I haven't had a working septic tank since the 90s. You guys switched the neighborhood to a shared system 20 years ago. Remember that big infrastructure project you voted for?" "Well," she said with a crisp tap of her pen, "according to our latest inspection, there's standing water near your outbuilding, possibly runoff. Possibly illegal graywater discharge." That was the moment I realized the meeting wasn't a meeting, it was a setup. She already had a violation notice printed and ready in a folder behind her. Slid it across the desk like a gift. I opened it. 1,200 fine for hazardous runoff, lake contamination, and property mismanagement. Due in 30 days, or escalating penalties would apply. I laughed, couldn't help it. "You're fining me for the sewage you're dumping into my lake?" "It's not your lake," she said, smug and matter-of-fact. "It's the HOA's lake, community maintained, community regulated." That was the nail. I stood, grabbed the violation, and folded it in half. "You just made a mistake, Karen," I said, tucking it in my back pocket. "A big one." She smiled again, all vinegar and lipstick. "See you at the next board meeting." Word spread faster than I expected. By Friday, neighbors who used to wave stopped making eye contact. My Amazon packages started showing up dented. The community newsletter had a not-so-subtle op-ed about irresponsible lakefront owners and the need for stricter environmental accountability. Someone even dumped a bag of dog crap in my mailbox. Twice. I'd been here long enough to recognize the warning signs. Karen had declared war, and now she was flipping the script like a crooked sheriff in a western. But here's the part she didn't know. The part no one knew, really, not even most of the board. 30 years ago, my grandfather drilled the well that supplies water to the entire HOA. Back then, before half the subdivision even existed, it was just a dry plot with one cabin and a retired hydrologist with a dream of living off the grid. That hydrologist was my granddad, and he wasn't just eccentric, he was meticulous. When the land started developing in the early 2000s, he signed a private use agreement with the developers, allowing them to hook into his well in exchange for monthly maintenance payments and a clause that said ownership of the water supply stayed with him, his descendants, or any entity he transferred it to. After he passed, I inherited the property and the well. The HOA had long forgotten. The pipes are underground. The check they send each month gets auto-deposited into my LLC. But I never canceled the contract, and I never gave them the rights. I spent the next week digging through my grandfather's old filing cabinets, the kind with steel drawers that weigh more than a minivan. And there it was, the original water rights agreement, signed, notarized, and stored alongside a county-certified map of the water distribution lines. I cross-referenced it with the HOA's public infrastructure records. Sure enough, the entire subdivision, including the clubhouse, the pool, the sprinklers for the parks, and every single residential tap, relied on water pulled from my well. I wasn't just a homeowner now, I was their landlord, their supplier, their lifeline. Karen thought she could find me into submission. But she had no idea that every time she flushed her HOA office toilet, she was using my water. And now that she tried to smear me as a polluter while pumping raw sewage into a shared lake, well, I had some ideas, starting with the next HOA meeting. But first, I had to tighten a few valves. Let's just say things were about to get dry. Very dry. The contract was so old, it still had fax numbers on it. Not emails, not QR codes, fax numbers. A time capsule of legal, ironclad language typed on yellowing paper that hadn't seen the light of day in at least a decade. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my tool shed, surrounded by folders and rolled-up blueprints, the smell of old wood and mildew in my nose, and my grandfather's name inked in crisp fountain pen on every single page. The document was titled Water Access and Supply License Agreement, dated April 1989, notarized by someone named Edna with a floral stamp, and it made one thing very clear. The well and the water it provided were private property, ours. The developer back then, a man named Hank Durbin, had signed an agreement for shared access under the condition that ownership of the well remained with my family and the HOA would pay a small monthly sum to continue drawing from it. But here's the kicker. The contract had no expiration date, no renewal clause, and no language granting the HOA any easement rights beyond passive use. My great-uncle, God rest his paranoid soul, had buried the rights so deep in fine print you'd think he'd been burned in a past life by an HOA president. I laughed out loud sitting there in the dirt because while Karen and her clipboard mafia were busy writing me up for made-up runoff violations, they were literally hydrating their entire empire with my inherited water. That laugh didn't last long, because then I remembered the sludge, the pipe, the lake. If they were this careless with what they dumped into the environment, what else were they putting into the system? My system. So I made a call to a friend I used to know from a short-lived stint in a water quality consulting firm, a guy named Doug, who owed me one after I bailed him out of a particularly messy incident with an excavator and a bottle of Jack Daniels. How soon can you get here? I asked. To run a full panel, lead, copper, coliforms, the works. I can be there tomorrow, he said. But if I find something, you gonna make it loud? No, I said. Not yet. I'm gonna make it silent. He showed up with his gear, looking exactly like someone who owned 6 flannel shirts and a freezer full of venison. We tested 4 lines, 1 straight from the well, 1 from my tap, and 2 from random hydrants around the HOA properties. The results came back worse than I'd expected. My line was clean, thank God, but the hydrants? Off the charts with fecal coliforms, phosphates, and chemical traces I couldn't even pronounce without choking. Karen and her crew weren't just polluting the lake, they were backfeeding sewage into the same supply that was supposed to be drinking water. Which meant not only were they destroying the environment, they were violating health codes, breaching contract, and best of all, giving me every legal reason to terminate their access without notice. And that's exactly what I did. No press release, no HOA notice, just a turn of a wrench in the concrete pit behind my garage. I shut off the flow, locked the valve, and chained the well hatch shut for good measure. Then I went inside, made some popcorn, and watched the fallout unfold like a slow-motion fireworks show. It started with phone calls, dozens of them. Then an emergency email blast. Temporary water disruption due to maintenance. By the next morning, water pressure had dropped across the entire development. Karen's precious fountain at the HOA clubhouse stopped burbling. Sprinklers failed to activate. Toilets flushed with a sad gurgle that sounded like defeat. Then came the bottled water trucks. One after another lined up like troops at a siege, funded by the HOA's Emergency Contingency Fund, which I happen to know was already overdrawn from the last landscaping fiasco. Residents started asking questions, not just about the outage, but about why we didn't have a backup source, why no one had been informed of a shutdown, why they were being charged $900 a month in fees and still had to haul bottled water like disaster victims. Karen panicked. I could smell it in the air, fear and desperation mixed with whatever she sprayed on her hair every morning. She called a special board meeting at the community center, plastered with HOA members only, signs like it was some kind of state secret. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. Because halfway through the meeting, a neighbor named Paul texted me a photo of the agenda. Item 3. Discussion of legal action against well operator. I nearly dropped my beer. Legal action? Against me? For turning off my own water supply after they poisoned it? I braced for impact. The next morning, a certified letter arrived via courier, complete with HOA letterhead and an aggressive serif font that tried too hard to look official. They were accusing me of deliberate sabotage of critical infrastructure, willful endangerment of residents, and breach of public trust. They demanded I immediately restore flow, submit to third-party inspections, and agree to a new operating agreement written entirely by their legal team, without compensation. I read it once, then again, then laughed so hard I nearly inhaled my sandwich. These people had no idea what they were doing. You can't sue someone for not giving you a thing they own, especially after you violated the usage agreement with toxic backflow and illegal dumping. They were treating this like a playground slap fight, but I had years of documentation, test results, and most importantly, a contract so bulletproof it might as well have been laminated in Kevlar. So I called up my attorney, an old family friend named Luann, who'd made a name for herself tearing HOAs limb from limb in land rights disputes. I'm going to fax you something, I said. And then I want you to bury these people in paperwork. I live for this, she replied. The cease and desist landed on Karen's desk 48 hours later. Accompanied by a certified complaint of environmental misconduct, formal termination of access to the water supply per Section 8.4 of the original agreement, and a notarized invoice for the cost of contamination testing, repairs, and legal fees. Total, $114,780, 5.62, payable within 30 days. Karen blinked. And for once in her overly rehearsed life, she had no script. But she didn't go down quiet. A week later, I was served. This time, they were taking me to court, suing for damages, loss of community access, and, get this, emotional distress. Claimed I'd weaponized the water supply to retaliate for unrelated disputes. Their attorney, some smug corporate lackey in a 300 tie, walked into the first hearing with a binder thicker than a Bible and tried to paint me as an unhinged recluse with a vendetta against order. Mr. Franklin, he said, with the kind of condescension you only hear from people who think lawn stripes are a moral imperative, do you believe you are above the rules of the community? No, I replied. But I do believe I'm above the sewage line. The courtroom chuckled. The judge raised an eyebrow. Then I handed over my packet. Water test results, drone photos of the dumping, contract excerpts, and a notarized statement from Doug about the contamination levels. The judge flipped through it slowly, then turned to the HOA's lawyer and said the 7 most beautiful words in the English language: "Why didn't you mention any of this?" The trial didn't last a week. The HOA's case crumbled like wet drywall. Karen tried to shift blame to her maintenance team. The maintenance guy said he was just following instructions. By the end of it, the judge ruled in my favor, declared the HOA in breach of contract, awarded me damages for property devaluation and stress, and slapped them with a court order to cease any future use of my well without a completely renegotiated agreement, one written on my terms. Bottled water trucks became a permanent fixture. The community pool was drained until further notice. Karen's newsletters turned from smug to shrill and then stopped altogether. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just installed a new sign next to the wellhead, painted in bold blue letters: "Private supply. Trespassers will be billed." Beneath it, I added a second line in smaller text: "Hydration is a privilege, not a right." I countersued on a Monday morning, right after frying eggs and flipping through the latest HOA email blast, which, ironically, was asking for community unity during difficult times. The eggs were still warm when I sent the lawsuit packet. 47 pages long, neatly bound, and hand-delivered to their attorney's office by Luann herself, because she thought it would be poetic. The countersuit named not just the HOA but Karen personally, along with 3 board members and their contracted maintenance supervisor. The charges? Environmental negligence, willful contamination of a shared water source, retaliatory enforcement of HOA bylaws, and violation of easement contracts. Oh, and for good measure, defamation of character. We threw the book at them and added a few custom chapters. I knew they'd fight dirty. Karen doesn't back down from a fight. She turns it into a brunch meeting and invites every bored housewife within a 2-mile radius. But what she didn't understand is that while she was weaponizing HOA newsletters and group chats, I was building a war chest of evidence. I had everything: lab, certified water reports, aerial drone footage showing the brown stream pouring from behind the HOA's maintenance shed into the lake, timestamps, invoices, and sworn affidavits from 2 previous maintenance contractors who'd both quit citing unethical waste management practices. One of them even left a handwritten note: "This crap's not gonna stay buried forever." Literally. I guess he was right. We filed in county court, and within 48 hours, the hearing date was set. Karen's lawyer tried to delay it on account of pending mediation, but the judge wasn't having it, especially not after he read the county's water board complaint I slipped into evidence. Turns out I wasn't the only one who noticed brown stuff in blue water. The neighborhood erupted. Once the suit hit the docket, it became public record, and once it became public record, it became gossip. Real, juicy HOA is a criminal syndicate-level gossip. Suddenly, the same neighbors who'd been avoiding me like I had leprosy were showing up at my porch with Costco muffins and nervous smiles. One even dropped off an old binder of board meeting minutes from 2014-2018 she'd forgotten to return after a brief stint as HOA secretary. Inside were notes from multiple meetings where Karen and 2 other board members discussed cost-saving measures for waste treatment and alternatives to city disposal fees. Their solution? Divert stormwater runoff to low-flow retention zones. Translation: my lake. But the crown jewel, the thing that flipped the whole case from strong to bulletproof, came from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. His name was Barry Colson, a bald, red-faced former county infrastructure coordinator with a bad knee and a grudge the size of a backhoe. I'd helped Barry once, years ago, when his property line was being squeezed by a shady developer. Gave him a copy of a land use map he didn't know existed and never asked for anything in return. Apparently he remembered, because he called me up the week before the trial and said, "You still fighting that HOA?" "Yep," I replied, "harder than ever." "You got a minute to talk drainage?" Barry showed up at my house the next morning with a USB drive and a manila envelope full of classified reports. including one from 2019 that detailed the installation of unauthorized diversion lines along Maintenance Parcel 3B, which just so happened to connect directly to the hose I'd found behind their shed. In other words, they didn't just dump sewage, they engineered a system to make it look like runoff while bypassing city waste inspection. Barry even had satellite images showing the installation crews working in secret, labeled as irrigation work. The trial itself started on a Wednesday, bright and early, with a courtroom so packed you'd think someone was handing out free land. Karen sat up front, dressed like a funeral director, flanked by 3 lawyers who looked like they billed by the second. Her face was pulled so tight, I thought it might snap. I sat quietly behind my own table, Luann beside me, sipping from a coffee mug that said, "My lawyer can beat up your lawyer." First day was all posturing. Her side arguing that the water issues were routine maintenance complications and that I was acting in bad faith to destabilize the neighborhood. Their expert, a smug hydrologist who clearly hadn't seen a well since college, testified that small-scale nutrient inflow could have caused the lake bloom, not necessarily sewage. Luann let him finish, then handed him a photograph from my drone footage showing a stream of brown fluid coming out of a pipe labeled HOA maintenance only. He stammered, looked at his shoes, and asked for a recess. By day 3, public opinion was turning. Reporters showed up. Someone live tweeted the proceedings. The HOA's legal team tried to bury us under procedural objections, but Luann sliced through them like a combine through corn. When Karen took the stand, she played the victim, describing how I had abused a position of trust to withhold water from the community. "Were you aware," Luann asked, "that the well your community relies on was never transferred into HOA ownership?" "I believed it was public infrastructure," Karen said, her tone wavering. "Belief isn't ownership," Luann said flatly. "Did you verify the deed?" I had our attorney look into it." "Do you have that in writing?" "No." The room was silent. But the real blow came when Barry took the stand. He laid it out in plain blue-collar English. They installed pipes illegally to dump crap where it didn't belong, didn't tell the county, and hoped no one would notice. I noticed. And now you're all noticing. The jury sat frozen. Karen's lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled him so fast it left scorch marks on the bench. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. The court found the HOA guilty of violating environmental safety codes, breaching their usage contract, and defaming me in official correspondence. Karen was fined personally for gross misconduct and negligence. The board was ordered to pay over $300,000 in damages and attorney fees, and the court placed a temporary injunction on all HOA activities until a new election could be held. You'd think it would stop there, that Karen would disappear quietly, tail tucked, but no, she went full PR meltdown. 2 days after the ruling, a local news team showed up outside the community center to interview concerned residents about the water crisis. Karen hijacked the camera, live, uninvited, and delivered what might be the most unhinged interview I've ever seen. She started by claiming the court was biased, then pivoted to blaming poor soil absorption for the waste leaks, and then, brace yourself, actually admitted they had temporarily routed overflow through the retention system to save on unnecessary expenses. The reporter blinked. "Are you saying the HOA intentionally diverted sewage?" Karen blinked back, realized what she said, and tried to spin it. "Not sewage, just gray water, reclaimed water. Untreated? It was natural runoff, combined with operational backflow. So, raw sewage? That term is subjective. It aired live, twice, then it went viral. Karen admits Ho dumped poo water to save money." That was the headline. The thumbnail was her with her mouth half open and eyes wide like a raccoon caught in a spotlight. The comments section was biblical. Within a week, she'd resigned. The rest of the board followed. The HOA's bank account, frozen pending audit. Community meetings turned into town hall mutinies. And me? I stayed quiet. Just watched it all unfold from my back porch with a glass of bourbon and the most satisfying silence I'd ever heard. No more trucks, no more fake violations. Just the sound of my lake starting to recover, and my phone buzzing with messages from neighbors who'd once scoffed, now asking if I'd consider running for HOA president. I didn't reply. I had bigger plans. Ones Karen would have really hated. But first, I had one last thing to do. Carve a new sign, nail it to the old maintenance shed, and paint the letters thick and red. Do not dump, we're watching. And under that, smaller still, P.S. We own the water. It all came down in a single afternoon. The kind that starts with humid stillness. The air heavy with the kind of silence you only hear when something big's about to break. The courtroom was packed tighter than a feed store on delivery day, every folding chair filled with a resident holding their breath. They'd been watching this mess unravel for weeks, the same way you watch a train wreck from a distance, unable to look away, secretly relieved it's not you in the wreckage. But today, it was Karen. And the wreckage was hers. The judge's voice was calm as he read the verdict, but his words landed like thunder. The HOA was found liable for environmental violations, breach of contract, defamation, and negligence. The board was ordered to pay me $367,000 in damages, plus $80,000 in legal fees, and submit to a full audit by an independent state investigator. But the part that really made my day? The court's ruling that the well, in perpetuity, belonged solely to me, along with exclusive control over all access, maintenance, and distribution. That meant they couldn't take a single drop of water, not one flush, faucet, or garden hose, without my signed consent. You could have heard a pin drop as the gavel fell. I didn't smile. Not yet. I just leaned back in my chair and let the weight of it all settle in. Karen was there, of course, tucked into the corner beside her latest legal team, eyes wide and hands clenched so tight her French manicure looked like it might shatter. She didn't speak. Not when the judge revoked her authority, not when the court clerk read out the environmental agency's pending charges, and not when a uniformed officer handed her a subpoena on live TV. Fraud, illegal dumping, falsified maintenance records, the list went on like the credits to a very bad movie. The woman who once fined me for inconsistent hedge symmetry was now facing a criminal trial for dumping feces into a public water source. Ironic, ain't it? The news exploded. Local, regional, even a national outlet picked it up. OA president dumped sewage, got dumped herself. My favorite headline came from a local satire page. Karen fined $300,000 for fining guy who owned the water. Even made the 6 o'clock news. The anchor read the verdict while sipping bottled water and trying not to smirk. Within a week, Karen's house had a for sale sign in the yard and a state seal sticker on the front door. Under investigation, do not enter. Nobody waved goodbye. No one brought muffins. Just a parade of city trucks, a hazmat inspection, and a U-Haul driven by what looked like her last remaining cousin, peeling rubber out of Willow Ridge faster than a teenage runaway. The rest of the board quit in a panic. Some claimed they had no idea what was going on. One guy, Jim, I think his name was, even said he'd just joined for the free donuts. Didn't matter. Their names were on the paperwork, and the paperwork didn't care about donuts. A special election was called to replace the board. For the first time in a decade, every seat was up for grabs. I didn't run. Didn't have to. The people who once sneered at me in the street now nodded when I walked by. Some dropped off pie. One neighbor, a guy who'd once screamed at me for splashing his tulips with my garden hose, hand-delivered an apology letter and a six-pack. Funny how quickly power shifts when the truth bubbles to the surface. At the first community meeting under the new board, the mood was different. No high and mighty posture. No lectures about mailbox alignment or patriotic bunting guidelines. Just folks trying to clean up the mess, rebuild what was broken, and figure out how to live together without someone threatening to garnish their wages over a lawn gnome. They asked me to say a few words at the meeting. I kept it short. Turns out, I said, when you find the guy who controls the faucet, you better pray he's feeling generous. Got a standing ovation. I only added one new rule to the water agreement. Not a fee hike, not a usage limit. Just a simple clause. Any attempt to subvert or override the rights of the well owner shall result in immediate suspension of services. They called it the Karen Clause. Voted it in unanimously. I didn't charge anyone for water. Never planned to. I just wanted them to know whose pipe they were drinking from. As a final touch, I installed a new plaque by the lake, big, bronze, and bolted into a stone pedestal I carved myself. Took me 2 days and a hell of a backache, but it was worth every minute. The inscription read, "This is what happens when you find the guy who controls your faucet." Underneath it, I added a second line. "In memory of clear water, common sense, and the last HOA president of Willow Ridge." The lake cleared up by fall. Fish came back. The algae bloom receded. I had Doug retest the water just for peace of mind, and he sent me the results with a single note. "Cleaner than bottled. You should sell this stuff." I laughed. "Nah, let it be free." Just not forgotten. That winter, I poured a fresh slab of concrete down by the old maintenance shed where the illegal pipe used to dump its contents like some unholy sewage slide. I capped the pipe, sealed the connection, and bolted a thick iron sign over it that read, "No dumping, ever." Beneath that, "We drink this, remember?" Tourists started taking photos by spring. A few students from the local college even asked to do a case study on grassroots environmental justice. I told them it wasn't grassroots. It was just old-fashioned revenge, rural style, with a twist of legal paperwork and a heavy pour of patience. Life settled down. The gossip died off. The lawn grew back where Karen used to walk her dog just far enough into my yard to make a point. She's probably doing the same thing in some poor Arizona subdivision by now, trying to convince someone their flower boxes violate the community aesthetic. But here, in Willow Ridge, we remember. 1 year to the day after the trial, I hosted a lakefront barbecue. Free drinks, live music, the whole 9 yards. People brought their kids, dogs, even a couple paddleboards. We grilled burgers, toasted to clean water, and christened the newly rebuilt community dock with a bottle of sparkling cider and a plaque that read simply, "The water's fine." I sat at the edge of the dock as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the water that now shimmered crystal clear from bank to bank. I had my boots off, my dog at my side, and a steaming mug of coffee in my hand. No meetings, no violations. No noise except the quiet rustle of breeze through cattails and the soft lapping of water at the shore. That's when I noticed the sign, my favorite one, still standing tall at the hill above the pump house, bolt heads glinting in the amber light. "Private supply, trespassers will be billed." The faucet was still mine, and so was the peace.